A big reason I do what I do is my son. So I have a 17-year-old autistic son, and when he got his diagnosis, if you have never experienced loving and caring for someone with a disability, with neurodiversity, with um, cognitive challenges, and someone who's different, who's never going to have a quote unquote normal trajectory, we were handed this kind of scary piece of information. And at the time, his father and I were getting a divorce. And so I was a single mom and figuring out how am I taking care of this child when I knew nothing about autism at that point. I knew nothing about what his journey and what his future would be. So I've had to very quickly learn to be his advocate, to be the person who is his voice.
What's up? What's going on, everybody? It's your boy, it's your host, Jamar Jones, and welcome to another slamming episode of the Foureva Podcast as we talk about things that are business and things that are personal because business is personal. And we're going to get into some awesome conversations today. I am the founder of Foureva Media and also a national speaker, and then the author of the book Change Your Circle, Change Your Life. And we're about to do that today as we have an awesome guest. Actually, on how we got connected is through LinkedIn, as she put out a video and I was kind of scrolling and I started listening to the video and I was like, I really like the concepts, the ideas, the action, and also overall authenticity within the delivery of what she was talking about in the video that I had to reach out. I had to reach out and say, you want to be on a podcast and talk a little bit more about this? So I was like ecstatic that she said yes, let's do it. And I'm talking about somebody that's definitely within the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging uh, area and of her expertise. She's also a speaker, trainer, consultant. She's worked with many different organizations, different companies, and also she is now the leading diversity officer at the Utah Jazz. So welcome, Tracy Bernal. How are you doing today?
I am fantastic, Jamar. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm super ecstatic to get into this conversation because I just love, as some of the other people we had on this podcast, people that just give you the real, the raw, the authenticity answer when it comes down to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Um, Also, I want to dive into your speaking and your consulting work there, as you've done some incredible things. So first, let everybody know a little bit about who you are and what you got going on in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you kind of already spoke to it. I am the first ever diversity, equity, and inclusion manager for the Utah Jazz. So, I started this role on November 1st of 2022. So, I just celebrated my fifth month with the organization and absolutely loving it. My timing could not have been better because, in addition to stepping into a new role with the organization, we were also planning for the All-Star game, which was hosted in Salt Lake in
Yes.
February. So, oh man, you want to talk about a wild ride from day one. So it's been amazing. And at that same time that I started this new job, I was actively running for a seat on my local school board in my city of Ogden, Utah. And so the election was November 8th, and I won my election. So I
Oh,
had, yeah, I had two really big life changing things happen in a short amount of time. So I continue to wake up and pinch myself and ask, is this really my life? Like, did I just do these incredible things? So yeah, that's my life, living the dream.
wow. Wow. So were you just were you an entrepreneur before getting this role? Or kind of how did that also how did that happen? I mean, were you looking? Were you trying to were you trying to find a new role? And I know the life as an entrepreneur, it's like every day is different, and especially as a speaker and consultant. So yeah, how did that transition happen?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like it kind of found me on my journey unexpectedly. So I actually have my degree is in communication, but I have a long history in the real estate industry. So I got licensed in 2006. I sold real estate for a few years, and then the market crashed and I kind of got away from doing that. But over the years, even through college and after graduating college, I held different roles doing everything from lending to title to home warranty. So I had almost two decades of that experience. And what I was finding a few years ago is lack of diversity and still issues with discrimination in our housing. And so, in my role, I actually created a course for continuing education for realtors, and it's about how bias and discrimination still impacts real estate in our communities today. So I started doing that, and I started getting booked all over the country to do these presentations. And I'm very passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I am a biracial Asian woman. I have a son who is autistic, so we have neurodiversity and disability. So I just people started reaching out and they were like, "Hey, we hear that you do these types of trainings. Will you come to our organization?" And it just kind of grew from there. So I've been doing
Wow.
that on my own as a solopreneur for a few years. And at the same time, I wrote a book in 2019. I did TEDx in 2020. So I was just chugging along, doing my own thing, and then this opportunity crossed my path, and I thought, like, if I could design a dream job, if I could think of the most amazing thing, this would be it. And
Yeah.
honestly, when I applied, I thought there's no way that I will get this incredible job, and and I did. So
Wow, there's actually a lot to unpack there, but let's we're gonna dive into that, but let's first go a little bit into your background. So, um kind of what was your childhood like? What was maybe some mentors or some big pivotal moments just growing up that kind of got you in this mindset, in this space that you are today? Because a lot of our listeners, people that are in our network, um, you know, a lot of people are trying to discover and find themselves. I always talk about unlocking your self awareness, and once you do that, I mean, possibilities are absolutely endless. So, talk to us a little bit about some of those stepping stones. Leading it through your journey.
absolutely. My dad is Filipino. He actually joined the US Navy. So back in the 70s, that was very common for the US Navy to go to the Philippines and recruit, kind of join the United States Navy, and you also gain citizenship. So that's what my dad did. We grew up moving pretty much every year because he would get stationed at a different naval facility. So I was born in New Jersey. We lived in California. We lived in Cuba, Virginia, Pennsylvania, South Carolina. So we bounced around a lot. Growing up biracial and growing up in different communities, and it, I just had very different experiences, culturally and geographically. So that was definitely my lens, is how I was treated in certain spaces. And it was just very interesting to me. And I didn't realize a lot of it until I got older and I could look back. But it was even at that young age of having to fill out a form and circle a bubble for your race, for your ethnicity. And being biracial, it was never like you couldn't just ever choose that one, right? And so
Mm,
my option was choosing the other. I'm an other. And yeah, so I always kind of grew up with that feeling of I don't really know where I fit in and how I identify. So that definitely shaped my experiences, and how I navigated the world and how I learned how the world treated people like me.
yeah, and that's something actually I think we have in common is just the traveling. Because I growing up, I went to 4 different high schools in 3 different states, and I would be constantly just traveling back and forth. Most of my family lives in Virginia, and I'm here in Milwaukee, and I think that just really helps you, and it helps understand your perspective. Like you just get a wider look at everything, um, different walks of life, different characteristics, different people, and it just helps for overall understanding of how the world is. And I know for myself, when I went to London for the first time, like my mind was just like, I just it, like exploded. Just because of I was the foreigner, out there, and so I had to like it just like everything was so foreign to me. I had to like relearn everything. Luckily, they speak English over there, but it's incredible. So I always tell people like in your journey, within DEI, you always like travel experience like that is one of the main necessity things and just learn and listen and grow through that. I think that's absolutely incredible. So when you're as far as when you were speaking, and so are you still speaking now today as far as just in your day? I know you're now kind of newly got a new job and things like that, but are you speaking still currently with organizations?
Yeah, so when I got this job, that was kind of a conversation we had in the hiring process is, well, what are you going to do? You've built up this business and I said, well, I will not actively seek any opportunities, but if an opportunity comes to me, I would like the opportunity to possibly, as long as it doesn't conflict with my work schedule. And
Yeah.
honestly, I get a lot of invitations now because of my role. And
Okay.
we kind of knew that that would happen. And so certainly on a local level here in Utah, I get asked to sit on panels, I get asked to keynote, and I'm happy to do that because I'm doing that really in my capacity as the DEI manager for the Jazz.
Yeah.
I have gotten a few invitations that come through my prior email address, and I take it to my executive and I say, hey, are we good? I'll take some vacation time. And I
Yeah.
actually, I'm going to Canada next month. And so I'm
Oh,
like,
nice.
yeah, I couldn't turn down that opportunity to go international. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so I still have some ability to do that, which is great because it's my passion, and I love that I am still able to do that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I was actually just gonna ask you, what is your passion? And a little bit deeper, why do you do what you do?
A big reason I do what I do is my son. So I have a 17-year-old autistic son, and when he got his diagnosis, if you have never experienced loving and caring for someone with a disability, with neurodiversity, with um, cognitive challenges, and someone who's different, who's never going to have a quote unquote normal trajectory. We were handed this kind of scary piece of information. And at the time, his father and I were getting a divorce. And so I was a single mom and figuring out how am I taking care of this child when I knew nothing about autism at that point. I knew nothing about what his journey and what his future would be. So I've had to very quickly learn to be his advocate, to be the person who is his voice. And I have learned so much in that journey. And so, learning about advocacy, learning about social justice work, um, I ultimately, the short answer is I have to change the world for him and for people like him because I know that our culture, our society, it was not created with people like him in mind.
Mhm.
So, it is my life's mission in whatever capacity I can do it. It's the mama bear, what can I do to make the world a better place? So that's really where my
Wow.
fire stems from.
Wow. And I'm sure for a lot of people that's gonna be relatable. I think that oftentimes within DEI work, we only kind of talk about certain areas of it. And I think that, that's an area that doesn't really get talked about much um, when it needs to. I think that overall, the conversation is that how do we make this all more inclusive? Um, and how do we kind of relook at things and see things from honestly from a different perspective, from a different experience, and then how do we make it more accessible, for everybody. um, so I think that, it's a lot of work that needs needs to happen, but people like you is what kind of moves that needle, moves it a little bit closer and closer every single day. So with one of your, with you being newly at the Utah Jazz, what's the first step that you do in this role, especially it's newly kind of created at the organization. What's your first step, and what's expected of you, I guess, is another thing, because I talk with a lot of different leaders in this space, and depending on the organization and industry, the expectations are oftentimes different. So I'm wondering kind of what's expected of you, and what were your first steps?
That's a great question because this is the first time we've had this role and I'm the first person in it. It does create a lot of it's a blank canvas, which is both wonderful and horrible because I get to like I'm the trailblazer. I'm the one who's creating what it will be for, future people in this role, and I get to kind of grow it and nurture it, which is so exciting, but also I don't have a blueprint. I don't have anything that has been done here previously. I am very grateful because the NBA, they started focusing on these efforts a few years ago. So the NBA is already very heavily invested in it. They just hired their newest chief diversity officer. So having that structure from the top down, and then they want all of the teams across the league to have someone in this role. So I think we're almost at 100%. There might be a couple teams that haven't found someone yet, but it's great that I have that cross collaboration with other. While I don't have someone necessarily here in the Jazz, I do have lots of other NBA teams that I can reach out to and say, "What have you
Yes.
done? What has been successful for you?" So I've really been laying the foundation, and what I've been, well, really, honestly, from day one, it was hitting the ground running. And how did my role work with the NBA and bringing the All-Star game here? So
Yeah.
things I got to do there was that the NBA was bringing some HBCU interns, so historically Black colleges and universities. We had some interns coming into town, so I got to work with them on some different events and activations, and um, and then I've been working on writing like a mission and vision for diversity, equity, and inclusion so that we can have
Mm,
something public facing on our website. I've been working with so many community partners because while my role is very internal, and we have 400 full-time employees and over 1,200 part-time employees, so I have a lot of work that
wow.
needs to be done internally, but also there is that external component. So working with our local Black chamber, our LGBTQ chamber, our Hispanic chamber, all of our kind of historically underrepresented groups, to make sure that we're, as an organization, how are we collaborating and making sure we're taking care of our diverse, our fan base. And so
Yeah.
just so many fun, amazing things that I get to work on.
Yeah. What do you feel like is going to be your biggest challenge that you're going to have to kind of overcome in this space?
Well, right now, politically, we are seeing that there is such opposition to
Mm,
DEI efforts. And so, in our last legislative session, in fact, we had a representative who brought forth a bill that was prohibiting, diversity, equity, and inclusion in higher education. And so, when we have that type of rhetoric out there and this kind of, I think, fear and opposition, it it definitely, things that are happening in our community, in our culture, of course they're going to overflow into our workspaces. So it is not only that I have a lot of work and projects, but it's getting that buy-in, and it's getting
mhm.
people to understand, even, what is she doing here? And should I feel scared if I identify a certain way? Is she here to, it's that idea of, I think, reverse discrimination or affirmative
Yeah.
action. And so I think that there's some fear that I have to help people overcome, and that's not why I'm here. And I don't want people to feel like they have to tiptoe carefully around me and that I'm like looking for them to mess up, because that's not at all the case. So I
Yeah.
would say that, yeah, that's probably is first kind of demystifying what this role even is. And I think, who I am, I think I'm fairly awesome and cool, and they should all just, once they get to know me,
Yeah.
they'll be like, yeah, she's all right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's even on your website. I'm a cool diversity trainer. It's literally on the website. Uh, so I think you hit it right on the head, because that's you know no matter what space you're in, like no matter what industry, what you're doing, what profession, you always got like the people the loudest on kind of both sides of a discussion, right? And I think what's happening now is that people are tiptoeing because they're just focused on the loud sides of both sides of the equation. But majority of the people are right in the middle, and they're just trying to figure it out. They're trying to understand it. They're trying to see what they can do, how they could support. But unfortunately, a lot of us, will just kind of look at what's the loudest things that are happening on both sides. And so I love that approach of like, hey, making sure people's guards are down. Just because you walk into a room, it's like, oh, okay, okay,
I know.
don't say anything, don't say
I
anything.
know.
It's like, no, like let's talk about it. I think everything. Let's just talk about it. Wherever you are in it, just let's talk about it and let's understand each other and let's listen. So I think it's so powerful. I think you have an awesome approach um to this work. And when you applied for the job, um what made you actually apply? Because you also said something that was very interesting, that you say that this probably is a long shot and it's not going to happen. But what actually made you apply to the actual role? Because a lot of people are scared to take one step. And I think especially in this space, but also in life in general, they won't bet on themselves. They won't take that shot. They won't say yes. So what made you do it?
Well, first of all, I'm very comfortable with getting told no. I'm very used to rejection. And so if you so I mean, if you watch my TEDx talk, I even reference in my TEDx talk, I applied for TEDx, I mean, numerous times before I got chosen. And I was like, I kept getting told no, I kept getting told no. And it was finally to the point where I was about to give up that I got the yes. And so I'm very used to like, it's fine if I don't get this, I can still try. I can still
Yeah.
put myself out there. And if I get shot down, okay, at least, I put myself out there. The reason I was really drawn to the role is that while I've been doing this work, I was never with an organization long term. So I would come in, pretty much I would get hired by a conference, by a business, by a nonprofit, and they would bring me in and we would do a one-time training, whether it was an hour, 2 hours, a half day workshop, whatever it was. We would come in and we would spend this time together, and then I would leave. And I didn't ever know what actual changes came from that time together. And the
Mm.
organization, maybe they implemented some things, maybe they started tracking, data, but I was not privy to that information. And I kind of felt like I love that I get to do this, but I wish I could be a part of actual long term change and see that and know that I'm a
Yeah.
part of it. So knowing that I could be with an organization, and not just any organization, because I'm with an organization that, I mean, we're an NBA team in Utah. Like we truly have influence. And so, I figured if I was going to be with, I wouldn't have applied for this role if it was just some company. And certainly if it was a company that I didn't feel like they genuinely cared about it and wanted to make progress.
Yeah.
So it just all the pieces of how I could be a part of something bigger and actually be able to see and be a part of the change, like that was just incredibly exciting to me. So
Yeah, yeah, it's and the long-term work is actually where the real change happens. And so I totally agree with you. It's great to kind of see those short-term like spikes in the things, but if you really want to affect change. And so one question I have for you, in all the places you spoke at and stories and everything that you've heard, one thing that constantly gets brought up to me is, how do you prove that things are working with DEI work? And how do you measure it when it comes down to, especially when you start asking for resources, start asking for, budgets, for the space? How do you measure that success? And I've kind of heard all different types of answers when it comes to this, because, I think a lot of people are still trying to figure this out. So I would love to hear your take on it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We are trying to figure it out. And I think partially with DEI is that there are metrics. There are ways that you can measure certain things. You can look to see how many women are we hiring? How many people of color are we putting in this role? What we can look at those demographics. But I think another thing to consider is also looking at attrition data and why do people leave, and digging into
Mhm.
that and digging into exit interviews. And that's something I haven't been able to get to yet, but that's something that's on my
Yeah.
list of we can only become better if we're looking at what we've not been doing so great in the past. And a lot of that is information we might not ever get. We might not ever know. And certainly, the jazz has been around for almost 30 years, maybe even more than 30 years, but like I don't know what happened in that time and space. I only know, and we have new ownership as of about 2 to 3 years ago. We have new ownership. And so
Yeah.
we're feeling certain changes. Certainly there's some cultural things that I've been doing listening tours with my SVPs and VPs, and talking about what's been your experience and what's the good and the bad and the ugly, and what challenges do you think I have in this role. So there's some information that just isn't going to be quantifiable. And
Yeah.
so how do it but what I get to start doing is I can look at certain numbers. I can look at those demographics, and we can talk about what policies, procedures, practices are we going to put in place to start improving some of those numbers.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you definitely covered on a lot of the metric ways that are the immediate, things that you can look at, which is, your recruitment and your retention. Those are both, metrics that a lot of times in companies are already in place, but how do you relook at those and reimagine them? And say, how do we move these numbers, um, to a more positive place? And then also, I've also heard the idea of relooking on how you hire also to be more inclusive. Like it's, oh, we want the 4-year degree. We want like, that standard, thing, but like also about how you're actually obtaining new talent and how you're what does that application process actually look like, especially in the world now of today of the internet. You don't A lot of people can be self-taught and actually be very valuable to an organization. You necessarily don't have to have the 4-year degree. And then how many people are you excluding from an opportunity because you have that barrier there as well? So that's another one I've heard, that it's also about the processes and measuring on how successful those are. um let me ask you, so let's say I know nothing about autism. Let's just say I don't know anything about it. What is um one of the biggest challenges of being a mother, um and kind of operating in this world and having your family kind of go through this, where I guess what's the challenge with autism, and then what's something that somebody can do to help support or make it better, and I guess assume that people are just kind of living their day to day lives, and um, what's something that we can do to support.
Well, autism is such a spectrum, and so there are people who have lower support needs and people who have higher support needs. So it's recognizing that autism can look so different on boys versus girls, on culture and upbringing, and whether they had early interventions and how late they got diagnosed. So there's no easy answer to address, how what does it look like? How do you know? And I think the thing as a parent is that getting a diagnosis, because I've had so many people ask me, it does feel scary. And there are some people that say they don't want to get a diagnosis for their child because they don't want them to have that label. And my argument to that is if you don't get a diagnosis, you're losing access for them to be able to have resources that they need, that they will need to get through their education setting, to get in, to better their outcome. And I would say if parents think that they have a child who might have autism, that they don't be afraid of the diagnosis. The diagnosis is a tool to help them. I think my biggest concern at this point, my son is 17, almost 18. people who have children with disabilities and neurodiversity, we know like once our children, because they become adults and they continue to have this diagnosis, resources fall off a cliff. And all of a sudden, when my son graduates high school, I have no idea. Once he is out of the public school setting. So that's what I'm currently working through, is working with our local voc rehab to see like what kind of job we can hope to get for him, looking at getting him on Social Security incomes, because he might not have a job, but hopefully we can get some type of income for him. And it's scary. It's scary and it's overwhelming. And then finally, it's really a concern for his safety, because he could go out in the community, he could be somewhere, and I might not be around. And research and statistics show that if he were to have an interaction with law enforcement, for example, that would probably not end well for him. And I work with my local police department. We have collaborated on autism training and getting a database set up for them so that they are more aware of autistic people in the community. But those are real concerns that I have, is how do I make the world safe for him? Obviously I want him to be included and I want him to belong, but I want him to be safe. So, yeah.
And how can we, I guess, how can someone support, in this space? And yeah, I guess I never heard that perspective from being safe. Yeah, and then after high school, that's or just but 18 years old, that's interesting. That's super interesting. Yeah, how can people support?
I think if people at least learn more about what autism is and what it could look like, because I think if we can shift our perspective, I feel like over the years I've become I say I'm an autism whisperer, because I tend to be able to recognize neurodiversity pretty quickly. But I think it's learning things like there is intersectionality between neurodiversity and gender diversity. So there are often people who autistic people tend to identify more as LGBTQ and transgender. Specifically. So I think, if people recognize that neurodiversity, if people would recognize that a certain behavior could be considered autism, versus people will just look and be like, that's weird, that's strange, that's suspicious. I mean, a few years ago in Colorado, a young Black man was walking down the street, Elijah McClain, if you've heard this story. He was not committing a crime. He was not doing anything wrong. Someone called the police because he, quote unquote, looked suspicious. And this young man had some neurodiversity, and he ended up dying at the hands of law enforcement. And these are things that I see, and they scare me to death, because just because someone is different, and that could be, define suspicious. What does suspicious look like? And that
boy would have to literally be looking like, I don't know, just walking around my yard and just trying to open the door or something. That, I guess, that's suspicious.
I'm like, my kid, I tell my kid he's the biggest weirdo I've ever met. But you know what? Like, people might see him and their mind might say suspicious. He's harmless, but they don't know that. So I would hope that people, if we can shift the way people see people who are different, and recognize that that it could be neurodiversity, it could be disability, it could be mental illness, it could be many other things, but not to jump quickly to conclusions that could harm someone.
Yeah. Wow. And I think that's the theme here. Don't jump to conclusions. Learn and listen, and and just try to, seek to understand, not to be understood. And I think that's the number one rule to anything. Definitely try to understand. And so what do you got going on that's next? And what's next for Stacy? I mean, you got a book, you're speaking, you got an awesome job role, board member. Um, what's next? Like, what does the future look like for Stacy? Like, what do you got going on?
Shamar, let me tell you. I am a huge proponent of vision boards and manifesting, which honestly, that's where I got to where I am today. And this
Yeah.
year, 2023, was the first year I was like, I am not putting anything else on my vision board. Like, I I can't even begin to wish for anything else. So I'm honestly like, I'm just happy to be here in this role and to build this and make it even, bigger and better. And honestly, I would love to get to a point where um, I could elevate up in my status, go from a manager up to, I mean,
Yeah,
man, get into the C-suite would be great, but also getting someone else hired on who could also be working in this role, because
of
this
course.
work is really hard to be a one person job.
Yes.
So I really want to grow this role, and then being on my school board, I'm really staying busy with that, and I want to make my community a better place, and so
Yeah.
that's it. That's all I'm doing.
It sounds so simple. It sounds like, oh yeah, I'm just doing this, doing that.
Yeah, that's
But
it.
yeah, it's very, yeah, it's cool. I just was like, well, what's next? Like, what are you gonna do next? Is it, build a spaceship? You gotta, are you running for president? Like, what's going on? Who knows what the future holds? There's no vision board. So,
Yeah.
no, that's really cool. And you're in your role, you are the first, and I think the first of many that's going to help support that role, and grow it. And because this work is not a one person job, and so I hope that through your journey that um, the organization, community, and everybody sees that to give you support and help you in that space, because it's a lot of work. It's a
Yeah.
lot of work, a lot of areas, a lot of learning, and so you definitely need a lot of support in that area. So where can people find you at? How can people get connected with you as far as on social and everything that you're doing?
Yeah, I'm in all the places. I'm on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. I do have a TikTok. I don't. Hopefully, TikTok will still be around for a while, but I do.
Yeah,
I do have a
we'll
TikTok.
see.
I know. I know. Please don't go. Um, and yeah, and I've got my website is See Stacy Speak, and so all of my information is out there. And yeah, I'm always around, everywhere.
Awesome, awesome. Well, if something you heard today that really resonated with you, definitely reach out to Stacy. Um, I would say that she's more approachable than So I know a lot of people, they see these people and they're like, they'll never message me back, or they'll never, take me up on it. But you just never know if you don't take your chance. And just like Stacy did, she took a shot. She took a shot, um, and it ended up working out for her, and it could work out for you. So definitely reach out to her, and also myself. I'm also available, so reach out to me as well if you want to change your circle. And definitely don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. Don't forget to tune in all places that we're streaming, and definitely drop a comment. Support, share the podcast. We keep having amazing guests on here, and just know that if you could take those steps, you'll be ultimately be able to change your life if you change your circle. So thank you so much, Stacy, and really appreciate your time.
Thank
Until
you.
the next episode. Peace. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notification bell for more amazing content that we're going to be putting out. And don't forget, you can change your circle to change your life.